Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's session on simplifying US presidential elections. I'm Koyal Sen and I represent the US Consulate General Mumbai. I'm sure many of you all have visited the US Consulate before and visited our American space, Dosti House. In fact, it is your American space. Just to tell you that at Dosti House, we do a number of programs. In a situation that is of today's, we do virtual programs as well as on a variety of topics that are close to both US and India. We do programs on women's empowerment, STEM education, human rights, and a lot of other topics as well. So I invite all of you to visit all our programs that we have been doing virtually in Dosti House, and also once the situation improves, please come to Dosti House for all our programs. Like we are also there on social media. We are there on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Visit our page and like our page. Okay, so now that the election season is here, in spite of both US and India being democracies, the election process in either of these cities, in both these cities, are totally different. So what we'll do is today we'll take a deep dive into into the world of US election. But before that, I would like to thank BNN College Bhiwandi for partnering with us today for this session. I would like to invite Professor Ravindranath Rasal, Head of the Department Political Science at BNN College Bhiwandi, and Senate Member, University of Mumbai, to say a few words about their college. Over to you, Professor Russell.
BNN College Bhiwandi is 54 years old. Our institution's present president, Sri Vijay Jadhav, executive president, Sri B.D. Kale sir, our principal, Dr. A.D. Wagh, our IQAC chairman, Dr. Shashikant Malhunkar, then our colleague, my department's colleague, Professor M.M. Deshpande sir, and vice principals, our BNN college, and teachers and students. This cordial relation we have with us consulate is from 2010, and also in 2016 July, we had a similar seminar organization over this topic, US President elections. This seminar is again organized on the topic of US Presidential Election 2020, and both of our librarians and a tie-up since 2016 till date, and will last long for education in your grace, in the grace of God. I thank all the participants of the professor and students to come together for this webinar, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Russell. I would now like to show all of you a very video clip by Shri Balakrishna Kade, who is the executive president of Padma Shri Anna Sahib Jadhav Bharatiya Samaj Unnati Mandal, Bhiwandi.
Executive President of Padma Shri Anna Sahib Jadhav Bharatiya Samaj Unnati Mandal, and on behalf of the management of college, I wish all the delegates a very interactive conference. I express all my good wishes for this web conference. Stay home and stay safe. Thank you.
That was great, and that was quite brief also. So may I now request Dr. Ashok Wagh, Principal of BNN College, Bhiwandi, to say a few words. Dr. Wagh, over to you.
Good morning. Good morning, delegates. I welcome you all on the occasion of this web conference on US presidential, simplifying US presidential election, organized by the Department of Political Science, the IQAC BNN College, in collaboration with US Consulate, Mumbai, India. I feel much privileged to state that BNN College is the oldest college in Thane district with more than 10,000 students pursuing higher education as well as their research education in BNN College. The college is re-accredited by NAC with A grade, supported by DST FIST grants by the Department of Science and Technology for Chemistry and Zoology. The management of the college is striving for excellence to bring to light the dream of the founder president Padma Shri Anna Saheb Jadhav. We are now the best college award recipient from the University of Mumbai. The Department of Political Science is the oldest department in the BNN College, which is actively involved in such type of activity, which is useful for the student and which is useful for even the staff members who are teaching as well as non-teaching members. This web conference is the outcome of the continuous efforts of Sri Professor Ravindra Rasal, the head of the department, and his colleagues, Sri Mayuresh Deshpande. I wish this intellectual discussion will be a bright and fruitful event for students who are doing their graduation in the subject of political science across the country. I express my special thanks to Ms. Koel Sen, Prasanna Shetty, and Mr. Denin, US Consulate, taking the initiative for this intellectual event for our BNN College and the students who are studying in the BNN College as well as in the political science. I again express all the very best to all delegates as well as to the participants who are actively participating in this event. Thank you very much. Over to Koel Madam.
Thank you so much, Principal Sir. I would now like to call upon Dr. Shashikant Malunkar. He's the coordinator for IQAC in BNN College, and he would like to talk about the great initiatives that they have taken in the college. Dr. Malunkar, over to you.
Good morning, one and all. On the backdrop of this COVID-19 pandemic that has hit very severely the entire world, we are meeting on this virtual platform on the topic of presidential elections being initiated by the US Consulate General, Mumbai, in association with the Department of Political Science, BNN College, Bhiwandi. I, being the coordinator of Internal Quality Assurance Cell, IQAC of BNN College, would like to say a few words
Hello, everyone. I have a feeling we lost Dr. Malunkar here. So maybe once he is able to get back and he has a better network, I think he's there. Dr. Malunkar?
Yeah. Sorry for the interruption. There was some interruption because of the internet issues. BNN College, I was talking about, is an oldest institute in higher education in Thane district. And this program of simplifying US presidential elections in collaboration with US Consulate being conducted on the platform of BNN College has some significance because BNN College Bhiwandi is situated in Bhiwandi. Bhiwandi is a city of powerloom which has accommodated migrants from various states of India. Each state represents its own school and language, and so the college hosts multilingual, multi-state students. It is mini India. And BNN College Department of Political Science is very vibrant as it has produced many councillors for the municipal corporation, mayors, MLAs, and MPs for the political upliftment and movements in India, in Maharashtra. As JNU is known for its political vibrance in Delhi, BNN College is equally known for its political vibrance and contributions. Our present head, Mr. Ravindranath Rasal, who is equally a Senate member in the University of Mumbai, is a very good example of it because he is actively involved in political activities, and his contribution to the college as well as academia and in administration of various committees in government are equally noteworthy. I thank the US Consulate, especially the today's illustrious speaker, Mr. Damien, the organizers, Mr. Prasanna Shetty, Ms. Koyal Sen ma'am, for organizing this wonderful webinar on the virtual platform of BNN College. I hope this webinar will definitely highlight number of issues that are connected with the election procedures that are conducted in US. We are equally curious and eager to know. Thank you very much. And I wish this will be a very fruitful interaction. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Marunkar. Okay, so without further ado, I would like to introduce our speaker, our expert speaker for today. He's Damien Vrignan, and he is Vice Consul at the US Consulate in General in Mumbai. So a brief background about Damien here. So Damien has studied political science and economics at the University of Florida for his undergraduate, and later he studied law at Emory University School of Law. So he joined the Department of State in 2013, and he has worked for 5 years, after that in Mexico, in 2 different posts. Damien moved to India in 2019 and is here since then. Okay, so over to you, Damien.
Thank you so much, Koyal. And again, thank you so much for our hosts to allow us today to have this conversation today. As mentioned in my bio, I studied political science and law, but I also, something I didn't mention in my bio was that in 2008, I also worked in an elections office. I worked during the presidential election in 2008. So this is a subject that I'm very passionate about, and I'm very interested about spreading as much information I can about this specific subject. Again, thank you so much for BNN University to allow us to have this conversation with you guys today, because it's something we're very excited to talk about. I don't see right now that the presentation is open. Is the presentation going to be shared with everyone else? Guess we're still waiting for the actual presentation to show up on the screen. There you go. Thank you very much. Can we go to the next slide? Yes, thank you. So today I would like to just initially give you guys a plan about what we're going to speak today and the order we're going to speak in. I will give a brief introduction about the U.S. form of government, and then we'll talk about the most basics. We'll start off with who can vote for a U.S. president, who can run for a U.S. president, how do you win the U.S. election, what is the Electoral College, and how is that involved in the process, what is our two-party system that we have in the United States, and what are primaries. Then we'll start at the end. We'll start talking about more about the types of ways we vote, because there's more than just one way that we vote in the United States. And ultimately, we'll finish up with some election numbers that we had in the last election in 2016. I plan to run around 25 to 30 minutes. So after that, we'll have plenty of time to answer questions. So if anyone has any questions, please hold them up until the end so that we can run through the presentation, and then afterward we can orderly talk about the questions later. Can we go to the next slide, please? Okay, so as you guys might know, the United States is one of the oldest continuous running Republican democracies. There's some countries that might claim they have older democracies, for example, Greece or England that has a constitutional monarchy, but the US has as of now, is currently the oldest continuous running democracy, Republican democracy, and it's definitely the oldest federal electoral constitutional republic, which just essentially means that the United States is a federal system. Very similar to India, that you have one strong centralized federal government, but also each state gets to have their own government, their own governors, their own legislator, and a shared power between the two. US elections and US presidential elections is governed by four major elements. First of all is the US Constitution, which is the supreme law in the United States for everything. It is the supreme law that trumps any other law, even other federal laws or state laws. Then the elections are also run by federal laws themselves, federal regulations, and state laws. In almost the 232 years that we've had presidential elections in the United States, the system has changed a little bit since we first had our own first elections. But the good thing is, the system has run towards becoming more and more democratic. It's become more transparent, include more people as time goes on. So the first thing I would like to talk about is who can vote. So that's the most basic part, right? Who can vote in a presidential election in the United States? Can we go to the next slide, please? So in the United States, originally only white males with land were allowed to vote in the election for president. This is again over 200 years ago. And since then, the system has expanded little by little. After the US Civil War, the system was allowed to expand to include all males, regardless of race, to vote in presidential elections. In 1920 is when we allowed women to vote for elections as well. We further expanded it in 1961 to include people from the District of Columbia. This is an interesting fact about US elections. The US Capitol, which is located in the District of Columbia, is not considered a state, and it's not considered to be a permanent home. In the past, not as much as anymore, but in the past, the District of Columbia was not considered to be someone's permanent home. Everyone would come to the District of Columbia for work, and they will go back to their individual states. So people who lived there were not able to vote there. Eventually, obviously, in multiple hundreds of years, when obviously DC, the Washington District of Columbia, became such a large city and with multiple generations of people living there, it was finally acknowledged that it is a city and it obviously deserves the right to vote like any other place. So that's when their rights were actually enacted to be able to vote in the District of Columbia. In 1964, we also expanded the rights to completely eliminate any certain type of taxes or exams that people used to be required to do in order to be eligible to vote. In some states in the United States, people were required, before obviously, were required to either pay a fine, pay a tax, or maybe do some type of civics exam before they were eligible to vote. Well, in 1964, that became unconstitutional, and everyone has a right to vote as long as they're eligible for the reasons. And lastly, in 1971 was the last time the voting pool was expanded to include people of the age of 18 years old and above. Before 1971, there was no general age for voting. Each state, again, could have its own age requirements. So Florida could require people to be 21. Texas could require people to be 18. Now, in 1971, it was a universal age of 18. It was actually, interesting enough, was reflective of the fact that after the Vietnam War, they realized that an American citizen could be called upon to serve his country in the army, but also could not vote. So you could be 18 and asked to join the military, but you also were not able to vote. So that's why in 1971 they changed that, where like it's only fair, obviously, that like if you're called upon to serve your country in the military, you also should be entitled to be able to vote for your country. That's why in 1971, that was when they included people from 18 and older to be able. So that's only been the overall history of like expansion of voting rights in the United States. A brief history of the expansion of voting rights. So you can go to the next slide. So who can run for president? It's surprisingly much easier. There's only pretty much one paragraph in the US Constitution that explains who can run for president. Essentially is a person who's a natural born citizen or a citizen of the United States at the time of the adoption of the Constitution. So I was saying, a natural born citizen who is at least 35 years old, who has resided in the United States for at least 14 years. 3 requirements. Be a natural born citizen, be older than 35, and 13. Interestingly enough, requirements seem very, very simple. Not a whole lot of requirements there. And other than 35, as we know, I mentioned it. There have been times, actually, interesting enough, in the United States, where prominent women have run for president, but were actually not able to vote. So that's an interesting tidbit of history when it comes to voting in the United States. Go to the next slide. That we've developed some other requirements, aside from the one paragraph in the Constitution. We also require that, like, the elections for president need to be held every 4 years on the first Tuesday of the month of November. Originally, the first Tuesday of the month of November was chosen because, again, in the past, it was just after the crop season, but not too early in the winter season. It was just in that perfect time of weather where people will be able to go vote. That's the thing. Your presidential term does not begin actually right after the election. It begins on inauguration day, which is January 20th of the next year after the election. So usually the president prior has about 3 months before the actual transition of power. A president can only be, or a person, sorry, can only be elected twice. That requirement also includes for vice presidents. For example, if a vice president becomes president, for example, if president were to expire, then the vice president becomes president. If he were president for more than 2 years, he can only be elected once. The whole point of this is to limit the term of the president to no more than 8 years. The reason why this, as you can see in the picture in my presentation, that's Franklin D. Roosevelt. He ran for president 4 times and was president for 12 years. After he left office, or he expired in office, but after he was no longer president, the United States kind of determined that like 12 years was too long for a president to be in power. So that's when we enacted other changes in our Constitution. confirmed for 8. Can you go to the next slide? And now, so how do you win? How does a person, after they qualify to run for president, they're 35 years old, they've been in the US for 14 years, they're a national born citizen, how do they run? How do they win the election? Well, the US system is a majority win system, meaning someone has to win the majority of electoral votes. Unlike a lot of countries, a lot of democracies are proportional democratic. The United States have to win the election. Currently, right now, in the United States, obviously the number has changed in the past, but now for someone to win, they need a majority of the 538 electoral votes, which means a simple majority of 270 electoral votes to win to become president. Can you go to the next slide, please? Now, what is an electoral vote? Interestingly enough, the US is not a direct democracy system. A person, a voter, does not directly vote for their candidate. What I or other voters do is that we vote for an elector. This elector gets together with the other electors of other states, and they're the ones to vote for the president in December. That essentially means that if I, for example, want to vote for a certain candidate for president, what I am doing is actually voting for an elector from my state who is going to vote for an indirect democracy system, and that's how we've been voting for our country. Each state gets electoral representatives proportional to their representation in Congress. Congress is our legislative branch. We have senators and representatives in Congress. And so each state gets at least one representative and 2 senators. So when it comes to the electoral representatives, each gets a minimum of 3 representatives. Can you go to the next slide? So each state gets at least 3 electoral representatives based on population. The more a state has, the bigger the population of a state, the more representatives that state will have. For example, again, Alaska, very small state population-wise, only gets 3 electoral votes. California, which is the most populous state, they get 55 electoral votes because they have a much larger population. And again, for example, my state of Florida, which is like a medium-sized to large state, they get 29 electoral representatives and electoral votes when it comes to voting for president. Now, can we go to the next slide? Now, why do we have this system? Why is this system in the US? It's not a direct democracy. It seems kind of weird because there's not a lot of countries, especially large countries, that have this kind of system. Well, the system was created because it was a compromise at the time of the inception of the country. When the US was established, there was a lot of concern for the northern smaller states that they were going to be overshadowed by the larger southern states. Rhode Island is a very small state compared to the state of Virginia. And so they were concerned that, like, why would they join a union with a state that's like so much bigger than them if when it came to every election, they would just be overshadowed by the much larger population that they had in other states. Well, this system was created to create a compromise where at least every state will have a guaranteed minimum representation in the election. Each state, no matter how small or how big it is, will always have at least 3 votes in the election. And so essentially this creates a more balanced system for each state to have a little more representation when it comes to selecting president and other kinds of events. The system also has become more democratic with time. Originally, the electors were not voted by the people. The electors for this electoral college were voted by each state's Congress. Each state, here named, you'll have your own legislative assembly, In each state, they were the ones who voted on representatives. Here now, today, it's voted directly by the people. I, for example, like again, I'm from Florida, and when I vote, I'm voting directly for the electors who are there responsible to vote for the person that I ultimately choose to vote for president. So the system has changed a little bit through time to become even more democratic with time. As recently as this year, the Supreme Court of the United States stated that the electors are obligated to vote for what the people tell them to vote for. Because up until this point, it was pretty much a promise that they were going to vote for what people told them to vote for. But this year was like completely confirmed by the Supreme Court that they have to vote by what the people, when they're voting, what people tell them to vote for, that's who they have to vote for themselves. Now, can we go to the next slide? Okay. Aside from the Electoral College, which is a big part of our system, another big part of our system is the two-party system. The United States, again, because we have a winner-take-all system, we have much fewer political parties than with a system that has a proportional representational system. Certain countries that give political positions based on proportion of votes tend to have more parties. But because of our system that is winner take all of a simple majority, the person who has a majority of the votes gets to get all the votes, all the seats, sorry. So that's why, even though there are no requirements or limitations to create parties in the United States, we do have third parties and other parties as well. But in order for them to reach national prominence or to reach like national news and get national attention, they need to have a lot of support. They need to have a majority of Americans to support them in order to get any kind of major position. Again, the United States, there's nothing in the Constitution that mentions the need of political parties. But based on just how the system is created, it is naturally coalesced into a system of having two major parties, which they vie to get a 51% of the vote every time. And since 1852, the two major political parties have been the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. Since 1852, all presidents have come from one of those two parties. Can you go to the next slide? Now, interestingly enough as well, I think this is really cool. The parties themselves, the Democratic and the Republican Party, have smaller elections that mirror the national election to choose their candidate. Now, this was not always the case. The Democratic Party and the Republican Party in the past used to choose their candidate for president internally within the party leaders, and that would present that to the public. But since around 1970, so about 50 years now, every candidate of those two parties has had to have gone through what is called a primary election, or just called the primaries, in order to become the party's chosen candidate. It's very similar to the national elections. They have to also go to each state. They have elections in each state with the same similar thing with electors, but like they call them mini electors. And again, you have to gain a majority of the electors, 51% of the electors considered the candidate for your party. Usually around, I think this year is going to be August, it's going to be when the parties do their national convention. The parties do their national convention, and that's when they present their candidate, their official candidate for president for that election cycle. Usually, it's only the party members in every state are the ones who are allowed to vote in those mini elections, the primary. Why do this in the first place? Well, it creates momentum. It creates interest. By having a small election before the actual election, people get to see the candidates, they get to hear them debate, they get to see them on the news more. So people get to be able to see the candidates, and it creates a lot of interest in the election. And it creates also like a system where like, well, he or her got more electors in a mini election, they're probably more likely to also get more votes in the general election. It's a way to like make the process more transparent and more democratic. And therefore, like ever since, again, it's become a very popular system in the United States, and it's going to be continuing for as long as we can see. The next slide, please. Now, voting times. Although the United States does not have a central federal voting system, I understand India or other countries do have a system where like the central government is the one who runs the elections and like puts the booths and all that stuff. The United States doesn't have that. Each state is responsible to run and fund and manage their own elections. For example, again, back to Florida, I have to go to see, I need to contact my hometown's elections office to see what the rules are. I need to talk to them and see where I'm going to be able to go vote, what time I'm going to be able to go vote, because they're the ones who run the election, and they're the ones who are going to be organizing the event itself. There are, even though there's no centralized system, there are three major ways people can vote for president or any election in the United States. First is obviously the traditional way, which is going to an election booth on the first Tuesday of November, which this year is going to be November 3rd. Most offices are going to be open between 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. Another way that's actually becoming more and more popular is called early voting. Early voting means that like your county or your elections office is actually going to be open for 2 weeks before the actual election. And you can come in any day of weekends or during the day when you have time to go vote before the actual day. So it fits your schedule better, because for us, the Tuesday of the first Tuesday of November is not a national holiday. People most of the time still have to go to work that day. So what offices have done is they allow for a 2-week period where you can come in, hopefully it's less crowded, you can come in that day to go vote before the actual day of the election. A third way is vote by mail or absentee ballots. That is for people who are unable to make it to their hometown or election location before the election. For example, my case, I'm going to be in India. I'm not going to be able to vote in the United States because I will be here during the day of the election. So what I did, actually, I do have it on me here, actually, is I requested my county, my hometown, to send me a mail ballot. So this is what they sent me. This is what I'm going to have. And I'm responsible to, also they gave me the envelope. I'm supposed to put this in the envelope and send this back to before the election. So that way my vote, even though I'm not in the United States right now, my vote or any other person that's going to vote, it will be counted before the actual election. Other counties, other places have different requirements. Other states and other places have different requirements. But in general, this is the three major systems to vote for in the United States. Usually, the election night, again, the first Tuesday in November, that one, each state, again, is responsible to count their votes. There is no centralized system. Each state will announce the winner from their state as soon as they're able to count all the votes where they're at. Because of the time difference as well, because obviously New York has a different time zone than California, as soon as there might be situations where New York, for example, has already announced the winner from their state, but we're still waiting on the California to close. So in general, there's really no consensus or general time that the election is over. But every year, every state has tried to tabulate the votes as soon as possible. And therefore, they tend to usually do it that same night. For example, in 2016, the election results were pretty much done and announced around 2 a.m. the next day. So they try to do it as fast as possible. Every state takes the responsibility very seriously, and they try to announce their state as soon as possible, so that way everyone can know their results as soon as possible. But there's really no set time, or there's really no set organism that is the one who announces the final results. It's just each state announces the results as soon as they come out, and then we tally out all the electors of each state, and as soon as someone gets 270 electors, they're announced to be the winner of the election. So again, in 2016, That happened around 2 a.m. Eastern time. So again, so a couple hours after the vote. Can you go to the next slide, please? Some quick numbers of the electoral process. In 2016, there were about 136 million people who voted. Of those 360 million, almost 57, 56 million, almost half, about 40%, voted early or through mail. But still, a great majority of Americans still went to the election booth on Tuesday to go vote that day. So it's still like, even though the other two processes are becoming more and more popular, and frankly, considering the election this year because of COVID-19, it could be something that people might do more. We'll see how that trend goes up this year. In 2016, President Trump won with 306 electoral votes. He, again, one only needs 270. Once the person reaches 270, they're announced as the winner. But obviously, you can always have more. And so he had 306 electoral votes total. And the election cost, only the presidential part of the election, 2016, cost a total of $2.4 billion. The overall election that year, including Congress and Congress, all the other federal elections, around $6 billion. But the presidential one was about a third of the whole. And that was I can imagine this year is about to be the same, or if not more. Every year, the elections in the United States tend to increase by price every year. And yes, next slide, please. And that's all I have as far as talking. That's me talking about the presidential process. I know it's a lot of information, from history to voting to who can vote and what's the electoral college. Now it's time for questions. I think if people in general have any questions, I'd love to answer them as well. See what we got here. Oh, look at this. The first question I have on the screen is, what is the process of re-election if a president resigns? Now, interestingly enough, in the United States, the elections are every 4 years, regardless of who is president. So a president might resign, like the first day he's president, and then the vice president takes over up until the next election. So it's more like the elections are set. Those are the years we're going to have elections. Anything that happens in between the elections is it's irregardless to the elections. So, for example, last time this happened, Nixon resigned as being president before a re-election campaign, and his vice president was the one who ran for re-election that year. Although it was his first time running for president, it was considered to be like the re-election of Nixon and Ford. So that's what would happen. Like in general, the elections are going to stay the same. It's just like who is president at the time is going to be the one who's going to be running for re-election. Let me see. Yeah. With reference to the United States election process, what is the exact and basic difference between a primary and a caucus? So a caucus, you're right, it's like a lot of states like Iowa caucus, some states do what is called a caucus, but it's a type of primary. A primary election, on the basicness of it, is essentially the election before the election. A caucus is a type of primary. Most states do direct voting in the sense like a candidate or a voter will just vote in a ballot like a paper, like this one. You vote like a piece of paper, you put it in a box, and it's tallied. A caucus is a different type of system where people get together and as a group vote on a piece of paper and all together. So instead of being an individual vote, it's a group vote. It's usually before you go to the group, you agree to be together to vote for that person. It's not as if they're going to debate and then they determine which one. No, it's usually a caucus. Essentially, instead of voting individually, you're voting as a group together in a caucus. So some states have that system because each state, again, is responsible for their own elections, and that's the system they chose for their primaries. However, obviously for the general election, it's direct voting. Is there election commissions in every state to run and manage the elections? Yes. On a basic level, each county, so the most basic government entity in the United States is a county. You have cities that are also inside counties. So a county, the whole United States is divided up into multiple counties. Each county has a county elections office. That office is actually, in most places, is an elected office as well. You vote for your county elections commissioner. And that person is usually the one responsible to monitor and manage the elections. And so, again, for example, it goes back to Florida. Florida, I know like my county elections office, it's like they're responsible for running the elections smoothly. And again, it's a elected position. So they also have to run every certain amount of years for job performance and job quality. Is there any use of electronic voting machines at any stage of the purpose of voting? Is there any use of electronic voting machines at any stage of the purpose of voting? Each state is responsible for their own system, correct? As of now, there are some states that do allow electric machines, like clicking on buttons on a machine. Each state has their own system. I know Florida still does paper. Some states have a mixed system where you click on buttons, but then a paper comes out, and that's the record of the voting. Every state has run different kind of systems for their voting overall. I know that like it's leaning towards more electronic with time, but a lot of states still like having a paper record. They like having a paper record of the official vote, so that way they can go and there's like it's there. It's not. It can be destroyed. It can be wiped out. So they know they can be counted later. Like some states, I know especially Florida, they do like to keep a paper record. So every vote is like logged and you always see it there. But again, other states will also prefer also to have a very much more efficient, I guess, system where like you click on buttons and an electric system comes up. Also, that makes it much faster to count as well. So you have to balance those two systems. In an all electronic system, you'll have the results instantly. But a paper system, you have to count them. You have to like count all the paper, you count the system, so it's a little slow. So like, again, each one has its own benefits or detriments, but each state is responsible to make a decision within the state. What kind of issues are mainly focused on by the candidate when addressing a rally or summit? I think honestly that's more of like a political question. As far as like what you show, like what the candidates are saying now, it's whatever is relevant to their base or whatever is relevant to voting group. But as far as like the voting system itself, there's no requirements. There's, again, anyone can run for president. The parties are the ones who choose their candidates, and then they put it for everyone to see. There's other parties that have different things that they have. Again, there's other parties in our system, not just the Democratic and Republican parties. We have a Green Party, we have a Libertarian Party, we have a Communist Party, we have other parties in the system as well. And so what issues do they mainly focus on when addressing the rallies is to the candidates themselves and what their base and whatever their platforms are. A big part actually of the national conventions is to set the party's platform. And usually that's when the party is going to announce their main priorities, and also that's going to be the main priorities for the candidate themselves as well. So that's usually that comes out at the national convention when all the elections party comes in and they talk about what's going to be the party's priority and all that stuff. Is there any changes in the current election system in 2020? I think the only major change I mentioned was that this year the Supreme Court finally officially announced that the Electoral College, the electors have to vote for what the people of their state told them to vote for. Up until now, it's always been like a promise in the sense that they are still people. These are actual people that still go and get together in December, and they do vote for the president. So up until now, there hasn't really been like a general obligation that they go through what they were supposed to do. That has changed this year, and it's quite significant that now they're saying like, no, they must go, if they were chosen as the elector of a state because they were supposed to vote for X person, then they have to follow through that lead. And that has been like the most recent change in election law, which happened actually this year. It might not actually change, honestly, a whole lot of things anyway, because in the grand history of U.S. electors, there hasn't been that many electors who have not done that. They've always, most of the time, the great majority of the time, have voted for the person they were told to vote for. But it was never written down somewhere that it was going to be, that they had to do it. And now they changed that recently, and so that was a big deal. Is there any election manifesto? Manifesto in presidential elections? Major parties, and actually all other parties, will have the main platform, which is like their presidential platform would be their main points of what they want to achieve during the next election. Or if they win the election, what they want to achieve as when they're in power. Each party will have that on their main website. I'm assuming obviously like the candidates as well will have their own like party platform or candidate platform to talk about what they want to achieve as far as like if they win office. How would the present political upheaval of Black Lives Matter impact the U.S. elections in November? Yet to see, right? Honestly, like it happened, each state reacts to the information differently. As far as the logistics of the election itself, each state again will have to adjust to what's on the ground at the time of the election. Either increase early voting, voting by mail, or increase voting precincts based on what's going on the ground itself. But it's yet to be determined, right? See what will happen. We won't really know until the actual day of the election. Oh, because also, forgot to mention, the early voting, or voting by mail, those results are secret in the sense that they don't announce those results until election. So if someone is, if a lot of people vote early, their votes, they're not announced publicly up until the day of the election. They're not a secret, so it's kind of, I think, similar situation in India, where like if some states vote before the other states, they don't want to over-influence other people. So like, yeah, it's like, so you don't want to influence other people who haven't voted yet by saying how much people have voted for a certain candidate or not have voted for a certain candidate. So we wouldn't really know any of this effects until the actual day of the election. How would Black right issues affect the election campaign in terms of candidature and voter turnout? I think honestly, it's like any other issue. The people put importance on what they deem to be important for the election cycle. That's the whole point of a democracy, is that people choose what's important to them. This subject or any other subject, they will vote accordingly to what they deem to be the best representative for the interest as far as a specific subject. So would it be Black rights or any other issue as far as like what they deem to be important, each person has to eventually select the candidate that they think will better deal with that issue. And they're going to have to determine what issues are more important to them, and then therefore vote for the person that not only will do what they want them to do, but also like puts the same emphasis on those issues that they want to put on those issues. Let's see. I hope I didn't speak too fast. I know I speak fast sometimes, especially when I'm presenting, but I try to make an effort to speak slow. Everything clear?
Well, thank you so much, Damien. That was really an interesting presentation. And the good part is that you have managed to answer a lot of questions from the audience also. You know, I noted that there were a lot of questions and you kind of touched upon most of those. thank you so much for this presentation today. Unfortunately, we don't have much time, to carry on with more questions at this point. So I would, of course, thank you for your expertise and the details with which you have actually broken down the US presidential election process. I would like to thank the college also, BNN College Bhiwandi. I would like to invite Professor Mayuresh Deshpande to offer his vote of thanks. Professor Mayuresh Deshpande, please.
Thank you. I thank our Honorable Speaker Damian Brignon for his informative and thought-provoking session. I thank Ms. Koyal Sen, English Language Outreach Specialist, US Consulate General, Mumbai, who is the driving force behind this successful webinar. I thank our President, Honorable Sri V.P. Jadhav, and Executive President, Honorable Sri B.D. Kale, Padma Shri Anna Sahib Jadhav, Bharatiya Samaj Unnati Mandal, for their encouragement and support. I thank our Principal, Dr. Ashok Wagh, IQAC Coordinator, Dr. Mayunkar, Professor Ravindra Rasal, HOD Political Science Department, for their timely help and guidance. I thank Mr. Prasanna and Shevare for their technical support. Above all, I want to thank all the participants whose presence made this program a grand success. Thank you very much.
Thank you guys for having us. Again, it's a great topic that I really enjoyed. Really enjoyed talking about this talk as much as I can, really. So thanks for having a lot of questions. Really, thanks for having interesting questions. Yeah, it shows that people pay attention. And I hope people understood what I was saying, because I'm afraid always I speak too fast. But again, thank you so much for having us.